Well, if you don't know his name, you know his music. Over the last 30 years, Rudy Perez has worked with the biggest names in music. 300 of his songs have charted in the top 10, and he's known within the industry as the Latin hitmaker. Not a bad career for a former refugee who barely escaped the clutches of communist Cuba.
Rudy Perez is a multi-Grammy award-winning songwriter and one of the most iconic names in Latin music. He's written hundreds of hit songs and written and produced for celebrities like Beyoncé, Julio Iglesias, and Christina Aguilera. In his book, The Latin Hitmaker, Rudy opens up about growing up in Cuba and his family's flight to freedom with only the clothes on their backs, and why he credits his faith in God for every detail of his stunning career.
Well, please welcome to the 700 Club the award-winning music producer, Rudy Perez. It's
Thank
nice
you
to
for
have
having
you
me.
here.
I'm so blessed and grateful to be here.
Well, your book, The Latin Hitmaker, is fascinating. What a life you've led. You grew up in Cuba for the first years of your life under the Castro regime, but your dad was a staunch anti-communist.
That's right.
How did that impact your family, Rudy?
It was terrible. It was terrible because I was born in 1958 and everything was normal. We were a tight family. Cuba was booming at that time, and when Fidel took over like a tsunami, he just came in and lied to the people and told them that he was a capitalist and he was going to align himself with the U.S. So everybody was happy and supported him, but when he actually saw the power he had, he actually said, I lied. I'm basically a communist and I have the Russian government behind me. And so my parents, everything changed, everything. I mean, we had rations of food. My mom and my dad were struggling every day. You couldn't really trust anybody. There was in every block, there was somebody who worked for the government who would report everything who visited you. If, for example, if you were cooking chicken, believe it or not, if it wasn't in the allotted, supplies for the month, you could go to prison for that.
So how did your family escape from that?
We were lucky because there was these freedom flights, and my aunt had left already the United States to the United States, and she claimed us. So my dad was in prison 5 years after I was born. He goes to prison for 6 years. And my mom used to go visit him with us every weekend. We would go on a 4.5-hour bus ride and then walk kilometers to this jail in the middle of the countryside. And one day, years later, he had been given a pass to go see the family. I think it was his mom was ill. And just in the nick of time that day, the claim from our family in the United States came that we were claiming us. So we all got together. We're walking down, towards the plane and in the middle of the road with all these guards on each side with rifles. And that was pretty intimidating for kids.
Your mom almost didn't make it.
That's right. My mom, I'm glad you read the book, Terry. I'm so blessed. My mom, we're all walking towards the steps of the plane, and this military guy just jumps in front of my mom and says, everybody can go except you. So we made this ruckus, we just completely started screaming, and somebody came and said, hey, enough, let her go through, and luckily we were able to make it.
It was God's plan. We assume when someone comes from a difficult scenario like that they come to America and everything is wonderful. It was a hard transition for you, and it would be for anybody, but share some of the things that made it difficult.
Oh my God, it was very difficult. Well, first of all, when we got here, we couldn't believe the abundance. We were mesmerized with everything that
grocery stores,
the grocery stores,
malls,
everything. It was like, wow, we've gotten to heaven. That's the way we felt. My parents were very poor. We couldn't afford anything because we left with only the clothes that we had on. And when we got to Miami, the only place that he could afford rents was my dad was at the inner city neighborhood in Liberty City and Alapata. And I grew up there. I grew up in church, going to church.
School was rough too.
Very rough, because I didn't know the language, so I was bullied constantly. It was a rough time. But my grandfather was a pastor, and so was my dad. And I know that all that adversity, I owe it to God and my faith.
At 15, you did what a lot of kids in that scenario would do. You joined a gang.
Yes.
You ran into some trouble.
And not because I wanted.
To survive.
Because when they came calling, you had to, I mean, all I ever wanted to do was make music. Yeah. That was my dream.
And that was actually, you know, you spent some time in a juvenile detention center, but even during that time, it was the dream for music that
That's right.
gave you hope, that gave you definition, that gave you purpose.
I used to get on my knees, Terry. I used to get on my knees when my mom used to come to visit me. She, you know, I would cry and cry, and then I used to get on my knees and say, God, if I get out of here, I promise you, I give you my word that I will always make music, which is what you intended for me to do. And
you had worked at your parents' admonition to do so, and bought your own guitar and amplifier when you were pretty young. But now it was that ability to play the guitar that really worked for you, and that brought you a big break. Where did that come? Well, you know, it's funny you mentioned that, because when I went to my mom, I must have been like 10 or 11 years old, and I said, Mom, I want a guitar. And she goes, oh, and that's nice. And I said, and an amplifier. She goes, how much is it? And I said, about $700, Mom. She goes, okay, you know, you're going to go get a job, and you're going to buy it yourself, and you're going to be very proud that you bought it yourself. So eventually, when I got the guitar, I started joining local bands and around the neighborhood, and I got lucky. After a few years, I ended up in a band called Pearly Queen, which traveled the whole United States, and we were doing all these Flanagan's lounges at the time, and so that was my university in a way, because we had to dissect all these songs that were playing on the radio, and we had to, you know, figure it out, and so that's how the producer in me was born. And the faith that you have today, really, I mean, you come by it naturally by your heritage with your grandfather, but there was a transition there where you moved from doing all of this for yourself, for fame, for glory. That's right. To living a life of faith. It's made a difference, hasn't it? Absolutely. And that was I think my dad, in the later part of his years, that's who embedded that into my soul. He used to tell me, my dad was, I always say that I do great because of my grandfather and my dad, because they were special people. You know, one time he asked me to buy him a pickup truck. And I said, Dad, what do you want a pickup truck for? He says, no, don't worry about it. Just buy me a pickup truck. I really need So I took him, I bought him a pickup truck, and it was to actually go and find food for his congregation. Wow. That he would load up the truck every week and just give people food. And he was just a very kind man. And he instilled a faith in me, which has always been childlike. Yes. My faith has always been like just the basics, you know, trusting that the Bible is true and the gospel is true, and that you know there's something great is going to come. And it has for Rudy Perez, and the story is all in his book, The Latin Hitmaker. It's a fascinating book, and I think you'd really enjoy knowing about his life. I have to mention my co-writer, Robert Nolan, who is an amazing writer, who also wrote I Can Only Imagine. He's a fantastic writer, and this book wouldn't be the same without him. Well, you've worked with the best, haven't you? This is the book. Rudy, thank you for being with us. Thank you, Terry. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. God bless you all. Wonderful life you've had.